Right, now on to the debate still raging about the decision to disallow a goal from Antoine Semenyo last night during Manchester City's 2-0 win over Newcastle in the Carabao Cup semi-final. The £65 million January signing thought he had scored his second of the night when he turned in a cross from Tijani Reinders past Nick Pope. But after a VAR check lasting a full 5.5 minutes, it was disallowed because Erling Haaland had interfered with play from an offside position, although it was tight, wasn't it? But why did it take so long? Let's go back to Dave Reed for more on this, Dave.
Yeah, it did feel like an age, didn't it? Antoine Semenyo thought that he'd scored another goal for his third in 2 games. Eventually it was disallowed, as we know now. Semenyo claimed afterwards that it should have stood, but was he right? Now, the lengthy delay was caused because the semi-automated offside system couldn't be used. Now, that was because the specialist cameras were being blocked by players' bodies, the players that were in the way, Erling Haaland and Malik Thiaw. Now, the result was that VAR had to go back to the old way of doing things, which was to manually draw the lines before making a decision. That eventually decided that it was Haaland that was offside. Now, there was a second decision to be made, whether Haaland was interfering with Thiaw, preventing the defender from being able to clear the ball. That's why the referee was then sent to the screen to make what is described as a subjective call on that. The PGMO has indicated it remains committed to making VAR decisions quicker. They weren't happy, understanding the frustrations for fans that lengthy delays cause. And as the debate continues around offside, FIFA's head of global football development, Arsene Wenger, has proposed a change so that daylight between the attacker and defender will define offside. It means that attackers will be called onside if any part of their body is in line with the defender. The Times were reporting yesterday, actually, that FIFA want to trial it, but that the 4 British associations are opposed. They believe it would have too much of an impact on how teams defend. More teams sitting deep in low blocks equals fewer goals.
Interesting. We'll get Mark Schwartz's view on the Wenger theory in a moment, but let's just start on last night's decision. Took the best part of 6 minutes. Did they get it right?
I think they did. Obviously, the biggest issue is the time of which it took to get to the decision. Of course, the semi-automated system wasn't able to be working, so they had to go back to the old one. That's why the delay took so much longer. If you take Haaland out of the equation in terms of remove him, would Thiaw had made the clearance? I think he would have had a very good chance to make the clearance. So therefore, Haaland is in an offside position. He is preventing Thiaw from making the clearance. So for me, it's a very straight. I mean, I thought straight away when I saw it, and I could see that Haaland was offside. I thought it had to be offside. For me, it's very clear.
But it just took so long to get there, as you said, because of the technological aspect of it. Do you subscribe to the theory that it takes what it takes, they need to get the correct decision, or, you know, so many fans so frustrated by sitting there waiting for minute after minute? Are you one of those that thinks they've got to have decisions on the clock? There should be a time limit, and if they can't reach a decision, move on?
I think this is one of the rarities again. I think we've had them, of course, and we've had them more often than not over the years, but I think more recently the time in which they come to a decision has been reduced heavily. This is one back to the old sort of system, and that was because of the failure of the semi-automated system. So I don't think this is going to be one that's going to be happening all the time in the same length of time. Of course, that's a problem. Do I want it more quickly? Of course. But I'm more of, I want the correct decision. For Newcastle, that is huge. In the end, if that goal stands, they're 3-0 down. And they're pretty much out of... I mean, it's a tall order now at 2-0. But at 3-0, that's pretty much done with. So I think there's too much riding on not getting the correct decision.
And we heard there from Dave about Arsene Wenger's idea, the daylight rule, that had to be daylight between the players. Where do you stand on that?
I think from terms of, if we talk about VAR and what implications it's going to have, we're going to have the same scenarios. Because you'll still be working out whether or not there's daylight in between the defender and attacker. So I think we're still going to have those sort of calls.
Isn't it easy to see if there's daylight compared to millimetres in an offside decision now?
Well, it's still going to be millimetres, right?
Yeah, I suppose so.
It's still going to be millimetres. So I think it's much of a muchness. Am I a fan of it? No, I'm not. I think the current offside rule it works adequately. The issue we have is getting to the right decision more quickly. getting a more efficient VAR system. And that's all well and good. That's all known and that's all working on, and it's not going to happen overnight. I think VAR personally has been a real positive in football because generally they get the right decision. Yes, you can always go back and say there's been mistakes, but we're going to get that. I think there's fewer mistakes now with the system, VAR system, as it was with referees making their own decisions based on their own, what they saw in a blink of an eye.
And just finally, if the Wenger rule comes in, if it does, do you think we see more goals or fewer goals?
I think it's an interesting one, really is, because teams, I think, will definitely defend deeper. But there are going to be times where I think overall we're probably going to see more goals. Because when teams are attacking, there is going to be a point where you just can't stretch yourself that far, are you? So I think overall there will be more goals, but it just changes the way the game is played completely.
So stick with it as it is, you say?
I think so.
Stand by it. OK, Mark, thank you very much indeed. Back to Mark Schwarzer here on the Premier League show shortly. And up next, more on the big game tonight. We're going to hear from Chelsea's Alejandro Garnacho ahead of the Carabao Cup semi-final first leg with Arsenal. Welcome back to the Premier League show. Michael Carrick has started work at Manchester United after being appointed head coach until the end of the season. He met his players for the first time this morning, and our football correspondent Rob Dorset was at the training ground.
It was an early start for Michael Carrick, who arrived at the Carrington training complex here before 8 a.m. with Jonathan Woodgate, his long-time friend and assistant, alongside him in the car. Of course, Woodgate was his assistant at Middlesbrough and an important inclusion in his coaching staff here. I'm told that all of the coaches were in shortly after 8 o'clock today, wanted to hit the ground running, and it's why Manchester United's bosses were so keen to get all the contracts sorted and signed yesterday so that they were clear, the coaches, to be in today at Carrington and meet the players for the first time ahead of their first training session. Now, before that training session, Carrick called an all-squad meeting, I understand, where he tried to lay out exactly what his ethos would be, what his approach would be as the head coach of Manchester United, and he also wanted to tell the players what he expects of them going forward. They then had their first training session on the pitch, and it's not clear who led that. I think Carrick wants to keep his cards close to his chest right now. Of course, he was schooled by Sir Alex Ferguson where nothing went outside of the changing room wall. So what role Steve Holland played on the pitch? Did he lead training? We'll try and get answers from over the next couple of days, probably when Carrick does his first news conference ahead of Saturday's game, which we'd expect to happen on Friday afternoon. But in terms of Steve Holland, I think his inclusion in this coaching setup is key. He's hugely experienced, having worked with some of the biggest managers in world football at Chelsea, the likes of Antonio Conte and Jose Mourinho, of course, as well as Gareth Southgate at 4 major tournaments as well. With the young and inexperienced rest of the coaching setup here, I think Steve Holland's involvement could be absolutely key. But there's no doubting what a tough start Carrick and all of those guys have got. Arsenal, the league leaders, away next weekend. Manchester City at home in the Manchester Derby, live on Sky Sports on Saturday lunchtime. Carrick's first game in charge of Manchester United. Pep Guardiola's had more than 560 games in charge of Manchester City. If the young pretender could get one over on the old master first up, that would give him